So today I'm the host of the podcast, and I certainly am talking to a superhero.
So I'm sure, as you know, Salesforce does offer 10 free licenses to nonprofits. I mean, Salesforce I still consider it to be one of the best. Versus Salesforce, it's more like a Lego. Salesforce does allow them to work efficiently. I mean, you can build the most beautiful system on the planet. If no one uses it, it's worthless. So you have to own the process, and you definitely have to own the result. The idea is that the higher the importance, the higher the value, the higher the more you can charge. Yeah, AI is just a tool, right? It's what you gain, what you do with it that makes a difference. If you're the best in the world, but you're hiding in a closet somewhere, no one is going to know about you. The experience definitely counts for much more than certification.
So Alexander, thank you again. And just a quick introduction about you, Alexander. So you've been in the field for more than 21 years right now. And while you're not implementing large-scale Salesforce applications, you're also mentoring and coaching consultants and also helping non-profit organizations make their impact in the world by adopting Salesforce. So great. Again, thank you for your time. And if I were to take a sentence out of your LinkedIn profile, a bio, so today I'm the host of the podcast, and I certainly am talking to a superhero. Thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. All right, so we'll start off with your experience at the Dreamforce event. And, so when you've been there at Dreamforce, was there any particular moment, a specific moment that made you go the path that you are on today?
So Dreamforce was in 2014. That was 10 years ago. And just to clarify too, I've been working in CRMs for 20 years, but Salesforce has been about 10 years.
Sure.
So it was more or less around the same time where I started to learn about Salesforce that I went to Dreamforce. So it was a whole new experience for me. It's an amazing experience. I highly recommend it for anyone who's in Salesforce to go at least once to Dreamforce. But I definitely did not know at the time how to take full advantage of being at these kinds of events. I was just going more for the thrill, the ambiance, to learn more about the community and the ecosystem, rather than starting to build partnerships or represent organizations. It was more of a freelance situation. So since then, though, last year, for example, in 2023, I went to 4 Dreaming events. So Dreaming events are not really hosted by Salesforce, they're hosted by the community. And by being smaller, you definitely have a lot more opportunity to meet people and really build connections. So I actually highly recommend going to those, at least 1 or 2 or more if you can, to these Dreaming events. I went to Dream Ole, which was in Spain. I went to New York World Tour, that is hosted by Salesforce. I went to Northeast Dreaming because it was close to my home. And then I went to Nonprofit Dreaming. So all of these smaller Dreaming types things were really, really great experience.
And that's new information. Thanks a lot for that, Alexander. That's certainly something that we would pass on to our team over here. Thank you. So another question that I do have is, as someone with expertise in the nonprofit Salesforce Cloud, what considerations should organizations take when they go down the path of adopting Salesforce Cloud for nonprofit?
Yeah, the nonprofit industry is definitely a special case because generally the users that are using Salesforce don't have a lot of technical knowledge. So there's generally a lot more hand-holding, preparation, training to make sure that they can really understand and comprehend and use the system effectively. If you just say, here's the system, have fun with it, they're going to get lost really quickly.
Yeah.
So you want to have, from the very beginning, more of a demo, show them how it can be done, show them what can be done. And they need a lot more guidance than a typical or for-profit client would normally need. That being said, the advantage of nonprofits using Salesforce, Salesforce is the number one CRM rather. So they get the benefit of all of that power in their own way. So I'm sure, as you know, Salesforce does offer 10 free licenses to nonprofits. So any smaller nonprofit that only needs 10 user licenses can fit really well within that. And they basically have a reoccurring cost of 0. So there's obviously initial setup cost involved, making sure that the system works for them, because typically Salesforce, you don't use exactly right off the shelf. You need to customize it a little bit. But the idea, once that's done, they're able to benefit from all this great power, all this great functionality, all the great enhancements that Salesforce keeps on going with, keeps on upgrading. and yet they're doing it in a very cost-effective way. So it's understanding that you need to harness that kind of power, but there is a lot of power, so you have to drive carefully. It's like getting into a very fancy car for the very first time. You want to take it easy at the beginning, but you understand that if you really wanted to go fast, if you want to hit that racetrack, you can. You have that capacity.
True, that's true. So if you really do want to understand what Salesforce has to offer in all its entirety, yes, there's a lot of hand-holding, and I'm sure that, that's a major portion of what you do for nonprofit organizations. And it's great that Salesforce has this option for them. I really do not know if any other CRMs do have this, but this is a great option for nonprofit organizations. Thank you.
There are some great options for CRMs for nonprofits. I mean, Salesforce I still consider it to be one of the best. But it's not always the best fit for every nonprofit. There are some other use cases where another CRM would be a better fit. I'm very open and transparent about that. But I generally see nonprofits, as they get more mature, as they expand or as they grow, they're kind of working their way up the ladder, the complexity ladder. And at the top of the ladder is Salesforce. There's no really other strong competitors in that space. At the smaller levels, there's a few great ones that I know of and I actually partner with when I find that the use case for that particular client, for that nonprofit, isn't quite a good fit for Salesforce. And it's important to understand the major difference between the two of them is that most of these other CRMs, they're plug and play. You buy them, you use them as is. There's one way to do things and that's it. But if you don't want to do it that way, then you're stuck. Versus Salesforce, it's more like a Lego playset where you're able to build a couple more things differently. You need to know the rules of the game, making sure you build it correctly. And that's why a good partner is important to have to help guide that process. But the idea is that the power is all there and you can really leverage it. And the largest nonprofits in the world tend to use Salesforce over any other CRM.
Great. That's great to know. Can you also share the success story where the nonprofit Salesforce Cloud significantly impacted the operations of an organization?
Sure. I don't have any exact metrics, but actually it was my first client. So when I first started working with Salesforce, I had two clients. One of them was a media company, one was a small nonprofit in Montreal, Canada. And this nonprofit was basically an organization that was kind of a middle organization connecting volunteers to other organizations. So let's say, for example, another nonprofit such as the Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Canada, which is a really big organization. Let's say they're doing a particular fundraiser or an event and they need additional volunteers. They could reach out to this organization. This organization would find those volunteers based on availability criteria, date, age range, and whatnot, and then supply them to Big Brothers, Big Sisters. They had about, at least at the time, 10,000 volunteers in their system. I'm sure they scaled up since then. But before that system, everything was pen and paper or Excel or Outlook. It was really a mishmash of stuff. So by moving them to Salesforce, and this was, again, 10 years ago, this was even before NPSP existed, they were able to harness all that power and manage their operations in a way they could never do it before. So I don't know if I don't have any numbers to say, how much improvement there was or whatnot, but I mean, they are eternally grateful for the work that was done and that the fact that Salesforce does allow them to work efficiently in their day-to-day operations.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great example of, automation of business processes for more efficiency. That's good. And in your experience, what are some common challenges users face in terms of user experience when it comes to working with Salesforce?
Yeah, so I'm not only am I Salesforce certified, I'm also UX certified, so user experience certified. And I do try my best to consider the end user at all times whenever building Salesforce, because again, there are many ways of building it, and you do want to make sure that the UX principles are followed. So some common examples are making sure you understand who your users are, right? And like I said earlier, in the nonprofit industry, you make sure that they're not technical. If you add too much complexity, if the pages are too confused, it might have a lot of functionality, but it might overload and overwhelm users.
It won't be adopted. Yeah, true.
So making sure that your overall user interface is simple enough that they can understand, okay, to do this, I need to go here. To do that, I need to go there. To make sure that it's not 15, dozen or more clicks to get something done, that there is a more efficient way of getting to the results that you need.
True.
Then there's then there's making sure, for example, all the page layouts are more or less consistent. You don't want to have one page that's 1/3, 2/3, and the other one is the other way. And then sometimes, the buttons are here, or sometimes the related lists are over there. Having a more consistent layout across the entire Salesforce, all the different page layouts will help, so that they know, if I want to look for this field, for example, I know it's more or less in this area. I don't have to constantly scan up and down the page layout to figure out, where is the created by field, for example. Then making sure buttons are in the same location every time, top right, whether it's part of a related list or not, and the button labels themselves are consistent. You don't want to have one button that's called new, the one's called create, the one's called generate, when in essence they do all the same thing anyway. So keeping a consistent and standard naming convention helps, not just also for buttons, but also fields as well. That would be a good start. I mean, there's a lot more I could talk about. We could have a whole conversation just on UX for an hour, but that would be definitely a good way to start. Actually, one more last thing is, if we ever do Visualforce pages, making sure you use the Salesforce Lightning design system, because you want, again, to be as consistent as possible. You don't want the experience to be jarring, where you have, it looks like Salesforce here, but then in this particular component, it doesn't look like Salesforce because it was custom. You want, again, more of a consistent, unified, uniformed look and feel. There you go.
All right. Thanks for that tip. Thank you. How important is user adoption in the success of a Salesforce implementation? I mean, sure, 100% important. How can you ensure higher user adoption rates?
Yeah, I mean, adoption is everything. You can build the most beautiful system on the planet. If no one uses it, it's worthless. True. So there's a few things you can do. The first one is always making sure to get feedback early. Like, get people involved, get your users involved in the building and the design of the system. As I mentioned, you don't just take it off the shelf. You have to design and build Salesforce, customize it to your particular needs. So getting users involved, or key users, maybe stakeholders, champions, getting certain people involved in that process so that they know they have a voice. They feel they have a voice in the say of how things are going to be built. Then find your champions. Pardon me?
Yeah, it's right from the start, involving them.
Right from the start, You don't want to build a system and say, here you go, this is it, you're done, use it as is. The adoption they will not be happy about that.
It's going to be a failure, True.
Finding champions, so people within the organization that will, be your cheerleaders, your champions, that will promote and help and inspire other people in the organization also helps. So it's not just you as an external voice, as an external vendor or an agency coming saying, here's how you should do it. You're actually getting people inside to be inspired, and they can inspire other people. So it's much easier for them or much more easy to digest if they have their own people telling them how great it's going to be and whatnot.
That's true.
Then Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, it's human nature, when you feel involved right from the start, you kind of own it, and then you have a champion, it gets the adoption much easier, like you said.
I think it's a key word, actually, ownership, because you're the builder, but they're going to be the owners. And just like you're building your house, if you're building a custom house, sure, the contractors are building it for you, but you have to own the decisions. You have to own the process, and you definitely have to own the result. So instilling that sense of ownership is an important part of this whole process.
True.
And then I would say at the end is getting feedback, making sure that even as you're building, or even post go live support, you always have this feedback mechanism where you're able to ask for feedback, for comments, for concerns, for desires for change, and making sure that you give it a chance. You want to at least accept all the feedback you can, then decide whether it's appropriate to do now, later, or never. But at least know that people can allow them that they know that they can give feedback in the whole process to improve things, because chances are you're not going to get it right from the beginning. Chances are you'll probably do an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then enhance from there. So making sure that they're part of that enhancement process as well. And it's typical where when you build it initially, you have a certain perception of what it will be, or they will have a certain perception of what it will be like, versus when you actually have it and see it and use it, it might be different. So their feedback will actually be more valuable after than earlier.
on the ground, practical decisions, practical directions that they receive. That's true. I mean,
You got it.
checking back with them, once the adoption is done after a period of time, might really open our eyes to the problems that they face and help them better. Very true. What factors should an organization consider when deciding between fixed pricing and value-based pricing models in their Salesforce implementation?
Yeah, this is another conversation that could go on for a long period of time. I know that hourly pricing is very popular. It still is. Right. I switched from hourly to fixed about 2 years ago, and I never looked back. And in doing fixed pricing, there's a few options that you have, one of which is the value-based pricing. Typically, when people talk about fixed prices, though, they think of the way to calculate fixed prices is basically figuring out your hourly rate, estimating how much time you think it'll take, maybe adding a buffer, 15% buffer, and then having a fixed price like that. And generally, that's not a really good way to do it, because estimating hours at the beginning of the project is the worst time to do it, because you know the least amount of information. So value-based pricing flips everything around. It basically asks the question, how much is this worth to the client? So if it's a critical project, if it's a fundamental thing, if it's going to generate a certain amount of revenue for the client, these are questions you have to ask, of course, during initial sales calls. But you can, through a combination of science and art, you can kind of get a feel for the value that this project is going to bring. And then it's totally fair to charge a percentage of that value. So the typical example I like to do is not necessarily with Salesforce, but it's a better example to illustrate my point. When you have a website, e-commerce website, and it has a very low conversion rate, and you know the annual revenue of that website, and you know if you give certain recommendations to the client, that their revenue will double, right? And if it doubles from, let's say, $1 million to $2 million, let's say, you're basically increasing the revenue by $1 million. Sure, you can charge an hourly rate, but you're also able to charge a portion of the increase of what you're able to provide. I mean, there's a lot of industries already do that. Real estate already does that as a commission type style. The idea is that the higher the importance, the higher the value, the more you can charge. So that's kind of value-based pricing in a nutshell. I'm not doing it justice because, again, this is a longer conversation. But with fixed-based pricing, to take a step back, the higher level fixed-based pricing, the way it changes things is it's really based or focused on the outcome. It's not how many hours you spend doing something, it's what is the outcome of your work. And another analogy would be, let's say you own a home and you have gardening services, right? You pay a company to come in to clean to mow your lawn, to trim your hedges, to keep everything nice and clean. Now, you most likely will pay them a monthly fee for that. And you don't care how many people come or how long it takes for them to do the job. Whether it's one person that comes with scissors or a team of people with all advanced technical tools, you don't care. What you care about are the results. And that's what fixed pricing is about. It's understanding that they don't care about how many hours you're spending in front of the computer typing on that keyboard. It's what did you achieve during that time? So by separating your hours from the outcome, you're able to achieve a much better result for yourself as an agency or as an independent. And the customer ends up being very happy because they know what they're going to get. You're basing your project, you're basing your proposal on not what you're going to do, but what they're going to get as a result of it.
The ROI per se, that's true. And I'm sure that, this might not be an easy route for anyone to take, and it's going to take a lot of trials to get to that point where you really understand how to go about this model, right?
It's a mind shift change. It's not something you can just pick up and right away and run with it. You have to kind of change the way you see things. And sometimes it requires changing clients as well, because if a client is used to you working by the hour and you want to shift them to fixed prices, chances are it's possible, but it's harder to do versus finding new clients that only know you as a fixed price individual.
True. Now that's an interesting take on how fixed pricing and then outcome-based is connected to the same, because mostly people have them two as separate models, completely separate. and you just go for the hourly one. But this is good information to have.
Again, there's a lot more we could talk about
it
it because there's different variations of fixed pricing. Like I usually, in the Salesforce ecosystem, I talk about 5 different ways of doing fixed prices, one of which is that value-based pricing. So if you want to talk about the other 4, we can, or we can just skim along and keep going. Again, this is a good long conversation we could have for a while, so I'm happy to go wherever you'd like to go.
Exactly. I mean, I think a series on this would be a good, or just a podcast for this topic would be a good idea, because I'm sure that you have a lot of knowledge to offer in this space. But this is good for a thought. This is good to get us thinking on this line, which is great to start with.
Sounds good.
And in your opinion, what emerging trends or features in the Salesforce ecosystem are worth keeping an eye on in the coming year?
Yeah, Salesforce, I mean, it's constantly evolving, right? Every new year, they're either coming up with new products or they're renaming old products with new fancy names. AI is definitely getting more interesting. I mean, that's obviously the buzzword and has been for the past more than a year now. I know Salesforce has gone all into AI. I haven't used it myself. I've seen it in demos and at Dreamforce and at certain other, not Dreamforce, but the World Tour in New York. It's interesting. There's something happening there for sure. I don't think it's a fad. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it is the future. So spending more time understanding how the AI works, how to leverage it, what is coming down the road, how it's being integrated into Salesforce. This is definitely worth keeping an eye on.
True. I think most people would have an idea of AI and then reporting, Einstein. But then I'm sure that there's a lot more to it, like you said, and we need to keep an eye out for what's coming. Yeah,
AI is just a tool, right? It's what you do with it that makes a difference. So reporting is one powerful tool. Data analytics is another. There's all kinds of stuff, all kinds of data analysis you can do on data that you will have access to by using AI that you wouldn't have or would be very challenging to do manually.
Right. That's true. Predictive analysis, that's true. And how can Salesforce consultants effectively communicate the value of their services to clients? Especially, touching on the previous question, especially utilizing value-based pricing approach.
Yeah, so one of the key components about fixed pricing and value-based pricing is separating yourself from the rest of the group. If you are just a Salesforce consultant and you're just one of many.
Right, that's true.
The idea is to specialize in something, to niche down, to find a focus, something you really enjoy doing. It could be an industry, or it could be a certain segment or a gender. There's different ways of slicing it, different ways of trying to decide what is your specialty. But the idea is that once you plant your flag to say, I am, in my case, for example, the Salesforce nonprofit guy. I'm saying this is my space, this is my world, this is what I focus on. It doesn't mean, first of all, that you have to only work with nonprofits. I generally try to, at least more than 90%. Actually, right now, all of my clients are nonprofits.
Okay.
I will work with for-profits once in a while if the project is interesting. But the idea is that I am a specialist. This is my specialty. This is what I'm really good at. This is where I focus my attention. And that already separates me from just a general Salesforce architect.
That's true.
Then you have to publish things. If you're the best in the world, but you're hiding in a closet somewhere, no one is going to know about you. So either having a podcast like this, doing a newsletter, contributing on in communities, this is part where you start. It's a type of marketing, but it's a way of doing it in a way that you're sharing your knowledge, you're helping others. So it's not direct marketing like, you need to buy my services. It's more like, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm learning about it as I go along. I'm sharing my knowledge with you. I'm happy to answer questions as I go along. Because just because you're a specialist doesn't mean you know everything. It just means that this is where you want to spend your attention. This is the problems. These are the problems you want to think about. I want to think about problems that nonprofits has as opposed to problems that banks have, for example.
Yeah.
So that would be a good start.
That's true. Finding your niche and then, making sure that you're visible, having your visibility out there is more important than doing everything in the dark. True. How do you approach staying up to date with Salesforce and the constant evolution that's happening?
Yeah, it's having your fingers in multiple different sources of information. So obviously, keeping track of what's happening on Trailhead, being part of certain communities. There are newsletters that people publish. Salesforce Ben is a great source as well of information. So it's just making sure that you have access to many different sources, even at a high level. And then if something interests you, you can drill down and research it more. But there's a certain amount of time that you have to spend in your week keeping up to date on things because the system is moving so fast. There's constant change. It's worth spending an hour, 2 hours a week, and whatever time makes sense for you, to just look around and make sure you know what things are happening. You don't want to be in that wheel, in that little hamster wheel, running around only doing project work for your clients because you won't have time to breathe, you won't have time to find new clients, and you won't have time to research and find out what else is happening in the ecosystem. So it's all about partitioning your time to spend the majority on project work, but then a portion on your business and keeping up to date.
That's right. Prioritizing and planning your time so that you have time for learning and not just doing the same thing over and over again. That's true. What advice would you give to individuals looking to build a career in the Salesforce ecosystem, especially in your area of expertise with non-profit organizations?
Specialization, I guess, would be the first one. At the beginning, if you're really, really just starting off, it's okay to figure out. You might not be able to figure out what is your specialization or where you want to spend your time. So working with an agency, volunteering always helps to give you kind of a wider, broader range of experience. And then through that experience, you should be able to figure out, where you want to spend your time. Right? How do you want to help? And then, it all trickles down from there. Certs are important to a certain extent. You definitely want to have at least the basic ones, admin, Sales Cloud, in this case, Nonprofit Cloud, Platform Builder. But I wouldn't go overboard on them either because there's a balance. I've seen people with tons and tons of certs, but almost little to no experience. And generally those won't work. Those people will have a harder time with actual projects. And I've seen the opposite. My first 8 years at Salesforce, I didn't have a single cert.
Oh, okay.
I walked around with the label of architect, but I didn't have a single cert to my name. And then finally, when I had a few minutes spare, I got 6 of them within a year, within 12 months. And then I could keep going, but the experience definitely counts for much more than certification. Certifications is more like if you don't have any other way of proving your value, of proving yourself, they are a way, but you don't want to let them get carried away either. Again, going back to my earlier point, you have to keep them in balance. You don't want to have the certs to be here and your experience to be down there. You want to make sure that they're more or less in balance.
Hand in hand,
That would be a good starting point.
That's a very important point that you just passed on there, because I know a lot of consultants who are starting by in their career give a lot of importance on just getting as many certifications as possible. What you just said makes a lot of sense. Practical experience beats everything. So thank you, Alexander. That was a great tip for everyone who's looking to getting into this career.
My pleasure.
With that, we've done with our questions for this podcast, and it was definitely an informative session. And like we understood, there's a lot of questions wherein if we can go in deep and have more conversations, but I'm sure that the questions and the answers that you gave today are really productive and would be really helpful for people out there. Thank you again, Alexander.
My pleasure.